phones muted until the Q&A session, and you know, if you have got a question, that you actually use the toolbar to actually put your hand up. And again, you can see that on the top toolbar there's a little face with a hand, and if you hover over that, you can put your hand up. For those of you who are not familiar with that functionality, there will be plenty of time for questions, and we're going to do some introductions. Before we do the introductions, I'll introduce myself first. My name's Simmons. I'm the Society's General Manager for Cooperative Social Responsibility and responsible for member engagement. I'm delighted that this is our first, what we're calling our interest group engagement activity online. Okay, oh, now Karen did tell me, look, she says, make sure you turn off the transcript, because everybody will see my bad grammar as I'm speaking, as it's translated onto the side here. As a good black country girl, I blame my education, but there you go. Okay, so next slide, please, Karen. So your conversations just give you a little bit of background to the concept behind the co-op conversations. And there's a number of you that are on the call that have, if you like, caught my ear over a number of years to say, Tara, we need to have more engagement activities with our members. What could we possibly do? And if I'm perfectly honest, the some real positives have come out of COVID. There's been a huge amount of sadness and negativity, but some real positive outcomes as well as. And one of those things is we were all forced, if we wanted to keep in contact with people, to start using digital forms of communication. And you will all know, as I know you're all members that have been on to our democratic events. We've run our two AGMs online, and one set of half-yearly meetings in 2020, and we will run our second lot this year very successfully, and in fact had greater engagement at both than we would have done at a physical meeting. But we do recognise the need for physical meetings going forward, and we're not looking to replace things. But definitely, as Roger, I think, said he was from Wakefield. Have I got that right, or was there somebody else? I think that was Roger. I think he's nodding at me, so that's great. I don't think Roger would have travelled all the way down to the to Warwickshire this evening for an hour and a half to talk about cooperative history. So that's fantastic that we're able to bring in and be much more inclusive digitally than we would be necessarily physically, with the challenges that brings. Also great for our carbon footprint that we're all travelling down the M6 on an evening. So from our point of view, I'm just checking, we've got Brian Morley is trying to get in. I'm just letting him in, Karen. That's great. So the co-op conversations, you will know that we have had a number of co-op conversations, and a number of them led up to our AGM this year, where we had some fantastic debates, great conversations, and great feedback sessions where we were able to show where members are influencing. But we also wanted to extend that out into some interest areas and some self-help areas, particularly in our community programme. So if you now go on to the Mid-Counties website, you will see there is a whole schedule of different activities. They're actually our member engagement committee are responsible for. So we've got two of those members on the call this evening. So Chaz as chair and George Conchi, and they've taken responsibility to ensure that there is an ongoing programme of activities such as this that will engage with members across a far-reaching spectrum, basically bringing like-minded people together. So thank you, Karen. We really want to shout about what we're doing. So if you're so minded and you are a social media animal, I would ask you to maybe tweet out this evening to say, hopefully you're having a really interesting evening talking about this subject, and make sure that you tag in Mid-Counties Cooperative, and the tag is there, and we'll make sure that we get that out to all of our members via social media, so they know that we exist, and hopefully more people will want to join us. Thank you, Karen. And then the spirit of the session today, everyone's view is important to us. And I know that there are some individuals on the call that have some really strong feelings about different subjects, and that's why you're passionate about history and heritage. I don't think there's any right or wrong this evening, and sometimes we might have to agree to disagree. Feel free to say what you say and what you think. That's, you know, out there in a view of being, you know, completely democratic. I think Scott's giving us some great love the co-op there in the chat. That's great. So do we all, Scott. That's why we're here. And some of us have been around a bit longer than others, shall we say. No right or wrong answers. As I say, we sometimes might have to agree to disagree, and we want to build on the other ideas that you come in here with today to where we can potentially take this view. So the agenda is very loose, shall I say. We have a dedicated an hour and a half this evening to talk about a subject of history and heritage, something that you're all here, I'm assuming, because you're all interested in and you're all passionate about. We've got a guest speaker, and I'm forever grateful to Richard Bickle from Central Midlands Cooperative, a director and a huge cooperative historian, who actually also chairs the group at Central Midlands that look at history. For us, this is about finding out what we want this group to be going forward. So there'll be a lot of general discussions and then where we take this as the next steps, because from our point of view, you know, we've not done this before. We don't know as members what's wanted, and actually this is member driven. So this is driven by you, although I'm here tonight helping with the facilitation of this meeting. You know, this should be something that is self-perpetuated going forward. It should be topics that you as members want to give up your time to talk about, and anything that you want to take forward. So it is, for all intents and purposes, your local cooperative history group, and how that sort of moves forward. We can make this into anything that we want to make it into, which is really exciting to be at the start of that journey. So I think it would be great, therefore, really to just look at who's on the call tonight, and just do a little bit of a background and introduction. So next slide, please, Karen. Oh, I think we're stuck.
No, I'm sorry.
So welcoming and really just as a little bit of a background to where we are with regard to sort of mid counties. This is a direct lift, as Tara would say, a pinch with pride slide from our website. These are words that are there for anybody to see. It gives you a little bit of background. In fact, on Friday this week, we celebrate the 16th year anniversary of Mid Counties Cooperative Society, and you know, delighted that you know, there's so much history amongst all the different societies, but we know there's lots of history within that history, and I think we've got somebody called Anne Ransom that's also joined us this evening. Good evening, Anne. I think you're there. And absolutely, hi Anne. And Anne, just before we do the formal introductions, I think it would be great just to let people know what you have done historically around history for Mid Counties Cooperative, because I think that's really useful for people to understand the context.
I asked when I was on the board, and I was about to retire because we had an age limit then. At 68, off you went. That was those days. And I thought, do you know what? I don't want to waste this. And I have my local history diploma. And I thought, you know something, I could really put the two together. All the knowledge I've gained on the board, plus my interest in local history. And that set up the Heritage Project, which had about 3 different pathways, if you like. One was to make sure that we were visible. And one of the ways of making us visible was to put as many of the records floating around in attics and storerooms to the local county history authorities, which we did. So this was when we were, excuse me, Oxford, Swindon, Gloucester and Walsall. then of course we merged. So there's a lot of material now which is in the public domain, is accessible from our history. That was one. Then it was a case of West Midlands history written history had stopped at, I think it was, I don't know, around about 1980, 1990. Oxford, Swindon, Gloucester's last written up in 1969. So we set up a plan to bring both of those histories up to date, which we brought it forward to 2013, because that fitted in nicely with 1853. You know, we had a sort of a round figure. And that is all there in the book that you've got, Tara. And then talks and getting local co-ops involved in their own history. And here I think we've got to mention Edna Marshall, who was, excuse me, Blockswich Women's Guild. And we must mention Stroud, a co-op which merged with Cairns Cross at some stage, but had all sorts going on, a little bit different. Remember the football poets and so on. Now, I've kept an interest since, but I have retired. I keep telling everybody that. But let's face it, I've got quite a lot at my fingertips still. Quite happy to share it with anybody who wants it. There you go.
That's great. Thank you so much, Anne. And I think it's important that people realise that, you know, as a society, you know, we are very proud of our history and our heritage, and we have kept some stuff alive. But I think it's fair to say we haven't really had a focus on it, and we've never had a collective group of people who have really wanted to, you know, delve any deeper and to keep things alive on the everyday agenda. So I think it would be prudent now really to do some introductions around the group, just so everybody knows who's on the call. So if we start with Chaz, do you want to introduce yourself, Chaz?
I will do as soon as I've unmuted. Yeah, evening everyone. My name's Chaz Townley. A bit like Anne, I'm also a bit of a historian. I've done stuff in the past on council housing, the local workhouse, as well as other various projects. I suppose the biggest thing I've done on the cooperatively was in terms of researching all of the names on the memorial board, which had originally been in the Ebley and Cairns Cross Society offices in Stroud, but is now languishing in a store. I think it's moved from being up in Tewkesbury to somewhere else now.
It's in Warwick, Chaz. Yeah, it's in Warwick.
I think, you know, I think it's really good that some of the stuff that's already taken place with putting stuff in the archives, but there is still quite a lot of stuff that's sitting around and needs to be sorted and sorted out. But it's, I think, to me, this is about bringing to life the story of the various societies, and I think this is a real opportunity to involve people on a much broader scale than has been previously, to be involved in the heritage of our society. I think to many people, this is about what's happening in their local area, and some of this is perhaps about celebrating and recording all the buildings that have been cooperative buildings. I shan't get into the sensitivities of buildings in other parts of the country which are disappearing, but we need to be thinking. And there are some good examples of buildings which are now being used for community uses, like one of the co-ops in Gloucester, just around the corner from the archives, is actually a community cafe now, and it's got a meeting room there, and perhaps that gives an opportunity to, as a meeting space for meetings. And I think one of the things we need to think about is how do we work across the region, and also what do we do in terms of encouraging groups in the local area as well. But I think probably rather than me, it'd be probably really great to hear from everyone else on the call before we some thoughts about the work that West Mids have already done. Sorry, Central England co-op.
Careful.
Fraudulent slip there, Chaz. So that's dangerous territory on this type of call. No, I agree, and it would be great to know from everybody that's joined the call why they've joined, what interests them, and what sparked their interest about giving up an hour and a half on a Thursday evening, actually quite a pleasant Thursday evening, to come on to a Teams call to talk about your co-op local history and heritage. So without further ado, maybe and I'm going to do this in any order. If you don't want to speak, then that's fine. If you just tell us your name and where you're based, that would probably be helpful for us. So I'm just going to go in the order that people appear on my screen, which is very different to everybody else's probably. But the first person is Roger that's on my screen. So Roger, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Roger.
That's great, yeah. You might be wondering what someone from Wakefield is doing coming into your society, mid-counties. I'm a bit of a co-op nutter, actually. That's the reason. I've very interested in cooperative history. I have a large collection of usually booklets that were produced during the various societies throughout the UK when they had their jubilees. I've got about probably just over 100 books, which I find, I've read every one of them, I find them very interesting. Obviously up here, we're on the part of the cooperative group. I was since about mid-1990s on the area committee at Barnsley, and then we got when we merged with United, things changed around. Then we came onto the Leeds group, which I met a lot of Leeds people who were very upset about their own society being disappearing more or less into United first, and then, as you know, into the group. And when the group did away with the area committees, we said we can't just leave it at this. So we started meeting occasionally ad hoc, and we formed a little history group. And the main thing that we did was that Leeds, the museum in Leeds had a exhibition on about things that were going on in Leeds, and we actually got a cabinet in there, and we produced a lovely tableau of a lady in the kitchen doing her ironing. We found loads of co-op products that we put in there, and that was quite successful. We were hoping to attract new members, but it stayed at the basic sort of 6 or 7 of us, and it's more or less fallen apart since then. But we are going to meet again shortly, I believe, in Leeds. So that's my story, really. And I'm of course a member of Mid Counties through obviously the energy scheme. So that's why I'm here. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, and you're most welcome.
Thank you.
From Wakefield. George, do you want to introduce yourself, George?
Hi. Yes. Thanks. My name is George Conkia. I've had an interest in cooperative history for many, many years. I think what first started me off was British Cooperation by Bonner. I managed to acquire a book by G.D.H. Cole, 100 Years of Cooperation, which sits on my shelf and is thumbed through. So generally, I've just got, I just love stories about working people, getting together with an aim and objective in life, and that is to form a cooperative society in order to improve themselves. So I just love basically co-ops. As Roger says, I'm a co-op nutter, really, in a way.
That's great. That's great. Marvellous. Thank you. Jules Farrell.
Hello, everyone. I'm Julia Farrell. I actually work for the Society in the community team, and I'm a very, very passionate Black Country girl. Very proud of our Black Country heritage and love the local history side of it. Take a lot of photographs of local places, things like that. But again, I think what was just said, it's all about the ethos of what a cooperative is all about. That's why I'm fascinated in learning out more the people involved and the places and things like that. but yeah, but that's why I'm on tonight, to learn more from all you wonderful people and hopefully collaborate. But yeah, mainly Black Country, Wolverhampton, Birmingham, those kind of places, obviously local to me. And we have an old co-op building in Walsall, and there's one in Wolverhampton that used to be Cooperative's, big, wonderful, designed white buildings that are no longer used. So yeah, it's all on my doorstep. But I'd like to learn more from everyone else.
Thanks, Julia. That's great. Okay, next person appears on my screen is David Smith. Would you like to introduce yourself, David?
Hi, I've been an active cooperator for getting on for about 60 years, and I'm a member of Mid-Counties by virtue of energy. And for no other reason. We don't have a Mid-Counties store down the road that I can use, unfortunately. We don't even have a particularly good court group store, but that's another matter. I'm interested in history in terms of, cooperative history in terms of what it tells us about culture and cooperative identity. And I'm particularly interested in history in terms of how it provides a way to inform, engage, organize, mobilize people that wish to take action in the spirit of what we all term Owenites of old. So I see history as a very good mechanism for engaging with people. And I'm secretary of what used to be called a regional council, Corps Mutuals Wales. We held 2 successful events. Some of you on the call will actually part of that. I think George was, maybe Richard was. And I think somebody from your member education department or member relations department was involved in at least one of the events that we organised, one in May around Owen's birthday, asking the question, what would Robert Owen be doing now? And involving a whole range of people in considering that question. And then in the second event that we held on International Cooperators Day, was concerned with looking at Co-op history and involving Co-op Heritage Trust and others in that conversation, particularly focusing on Co-op history in Wales, which needs a lot more attention than hitherto. And we also had a very good lecture from Prof. Chris Williams from Cork University, who some of you will probably know from the book he jointly edited with someone who's recently died. Actually, he was a fellow academic at Swansea University at the time, on Robert Owen's legacy. And I'm interested in just understanding what's bringing people to events like this, trying to see how we work across the UK rather than it just being specific society-based. We're going to be organising an event on Owen's birthday on the 14th of May of next year. It'll be an international event. Probably it will be involving students and pupils from Malaysia in cooperative schools. And there again, we'll be actually looking at Robert Owen and his legacy. So I'll stop at that. Thank you.
That's great, David. Well, thank you for joining us. And I know that your vision is that cooperatives, particularly around history, start to come together to pull that jigsaw together is something that's shared by a number of other people on the call. So I think, the cooperation in numbers to create a bigger output and impact is possibly something that, from a history point of view, we hope to be able to cross over those barriers, which is great.
Can I just mention from an mobilising perspective, we must have had, I think, a good 150, 170 people, of about 200 that registered, involved in the 2 events that we organised. All that was put together for very little cost relative to traditional membership activity, We're talking about around less than £1,500. And out of the various events that we organise, we broke it up into sections, and I'll put into is there a chat box? I'll probably
yes,
put
there is a chat. Yeah.
to the chat box where you'll be able to see 11 short videos that we put onto a YouTube channel, which was a very good discipline for getting a title and then a description, and just enabling people to actually communicate different messages. Like there was an interview between pupils from Newtown Primary School interviewing our First Minister, Mark Drakeford. There are other things like that that we were able to manage, and it cost us very little money to put together.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I think we've done a lot of learning on how to sort of extend a communication out to a wider population through digital means, but also using things like YouTube. And we found actually really quite interesting these conversations that we're recording. We're putting on our YouTube channel, and actually we're getting more people look at them after than actually are attending. So that definitely that is a way to get to people. That's great. Thank you for that. Okay, the next person that's on my list is Judith. Judith, are you with us? Oh, maybe we lost Judith. Oh, Judith, can you hear us? Oh, maybe we'll come back to Judith. I'm not sure. Okay. The next person that has, I think, joined us, just looking down the list now, is Scott. Scott, are you with us?
Hello, I am. Yes, just trying to sort my technology out. My laptop's not the best.
That's okay. We can hear you. That's great.
Oh, fantastic. Trying to get the camera working, but it doesn't appear to want to work. Oh, there we go. Hello. My name is Scott. I think I'm pretty much the same as everyone in the meeting, a bit of a co-op nut. It should be a tagline for cooperators, I think. So, I mean, I first got interested in co-ops approximately 12 years ago. I joined two societies, the Co-op Group and the Heart of England Co-op. Currently, I'm a serving director at the Heart of England, neighbouring society to Mid-Counties.
Okay.
And I just think cooperatives are a fantastic way to do business, and why wouldn't people want to be part of a co-op? So I think promoting what we do now as well as our history is very important to help show people that it's not just Co-op Group, you know, there's more than one society, and it's not just a loyalty card, which unfortunately I think some customers and members do think is the case sometimes. So it's about getting that positive message out there.
Right. Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Okay, Juliet, you're next on my list.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juliet. I too work at Mid-Counties Cooperative. I've been there coming up for a year, actually, and I think probably to echo some of what's already been said, I'm a relative newbie, so I don't think I qualify as a nut yet, but hopefully I've started that journey. I feel very proud to work at Mid-Counties Cooperative, and I think the whole ethos of cooperation, I think probably similar to what Scott's just said, it feels like the time feels very right for cooperation and for working together at the moment. So I think I'm particularly keen to know what we can learn from what has happened and how we can help more people see the benefits of cooperation and cooperatives, so we can spread the message. And Roger, as a fellow Yorkshire lass, it's lovely to have somebody else from Yorkshire on the call.
Fantastic. Thank you, Juliet. That's brilliant. Okay, I've got James next. James, are you still on the call? James, if you're talking, you're on mute. Okay, if you want to put in the chat anything, James, that's great. Not sure. Oh, James is typing, so that could be that James is not able. Oh, I'm struggling with my microphone. I think that's it. So we'll welcome James anyway. Oh, he's on his mobile phone, as you can see in the chat. So James, welcome. And if you want to put something in the chat with regard to who you are, where you're from, and why you're interested in to give up your evening this evening, that's great. Thank you. Okay, and I think Chris Hall's actually joined us. Chris, are you with us?
I am, thank you. Hello.
Thank you. Hello. Hello, Chris, and welcome. Lovely to see you.
Thank you. I'm just trying to pick up the thread, so it's really just a quick introduction. So I'm here in Wrexham, North Wales. I've actually just got in from work. I said I might be late. Sorry about that. Yeah, I joined the Co-op group probably 1990s. Co-op Party probably about 99, 2000. I've joined quite a number of other co-ops, including the Coffee Co-op Revolver. I work with David Smith on Co-ops and Mutuals Wales. I do support all things cooperative. I guess, therefore, it forces me to accept that I am a co-op nut, with some reluctance, but yeah, I guess it's a gentle term. So I support that, and I think if we look at the history, but with the benefit of looking backwards, but with the view to trying to look forward, in other words, get something out of it, so that we're trying to explain why we think it's valuable and important, and then we can actually therefore project that in a forward-looking way. And just to share one thought with you, which I think Mid-Counties did support us on, and certainly some other co-ops supported us on, myself and David did Robert Owen centenary celebrations, 250th, and we were looking backwards at his history and what his impact was, but we also then looked forward and said to school children, what would Robert Owen be doing if he was around today? Might he be creating an energy co-op? Might he be creating a tuck shop, fair trade tuck shop at a school? Might he be creating renewable energy and solar panels? Or, you know, so in others, we tried to be forward thinking. We're trying to create a Robert Owen Day, so it would very much relate to history and education. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And thank you. I'm sure you've had no tea. You've just come straight in from work and jumped on. So that's brilliant. And then Stephen's with us this evening. Stephen Hawksworth.
Good evening, all. I'm in Gloucester. History, culture, well, National Trust is, of course, national, but locally, I'm chairman of Gloucester Local History Society. I'm a member of the Gloucestershire Family History Society. I'm a supporter of various culture organisations in Gloucester, and I have a keen interest in my roots. I'm Gloucester born bred and from a very much working class, hands-on household, although today we can't really say working class. It's taboo, I'm told, by my son and daughter. So when I go back to my school days, yes, I was brought up in a small household, lots of children, lots of brothers and sisters. You will go to work with your hands. But I actually liked history at school, and the idea of the humanities was a bit frowned upon. But I only enjoyed history from the Victorian era onwards, and that tied in with my family, because my family years ago in the Victorian era, they were Chartists, they were cooperators, they were colleagues of Fergus O'Connor, the Chartist leader. So as a child in the 1960s, I would listen to the conversations around the table, and I had a Methodist upbringing. There was no television, there was no entertainment, there was no radio. Even though we were a working class family, it was a long meal time around a big oak table, and we talked, and we, in effect, self-educated. And I've taken that interest on with me since. And in the case of Gloucester, well, my family were with the Course Cooperative Society. They got involved with the Gloucester and Sevenside, or the Gloucester Industrial Society. It was always a sparky time for all. It wasn't smooth, but I followed that through. I do have an interest in terms of cooperation. Gloucester is quite a cooperative city. A lot of its history is linked in. And I think today, if we could send these untold stories out, and the social stories, the stories of the people, we could entertain, we could inform, we could enlighten, and people could learn from the past. Not just members, I think wider audience, clubs, societies. We could go out and we could wave the flag. So that's my little bit for tonight.
Thank you, Stephen. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Okay, Brian, are you with us?
Hello, yes.
Hi, Brian.
Just putting the video on as well if I can. Yeah, I'm Brian Morley and I'm in Reading. I'm a member of the Mid-Counties, but historically I'm a member of the Reading Cooperative Society and a board member there, and later a regional committee member of Cooperative. group. I've got Bonner on my shelf as well as George, and GDH Cole, and I've always been interested in cooperative history. My master's degree dissertation was on Reading Industrial Cooperative Society and the founding of the first branch of the WEA, which was in Reading and was achieved through the efforts of the Education Committee of the Cooperative Society. So I'm very interested in the role of cooperative education and cooperative history in general.
How it connects us.
And this, I think, connects my family, my wife, who's cooperator as well, and has been in her past history overseas.
That's fantastic, Brian. Well, welcome, and thank you for sharing that with us. I'm now mindful that I'm at a very delicate point of missing somebody else out here that hasn't been invited other than Richard yet to speak. So if there's anybody that I've missed, do you want to jump in now? And I'll take silence as a you haven't missed anybody, Tara.
Hi, I'm Luke. Hello, everyone.
Oh, hello, Luke. Sorry. Yeah. Hi. Did you drop in and drop back out again? Have you been in there?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. That's fine.
Good to see everyone. I think there's only one person I've met before, so no, good to be here. Good to meet everyone.
Great. So, Luke, where are you based, and what's your interest?
I'm based in the Bexley, South London area. And my interest, I'm originally a phone cart member. So yes, Vivian Wizzle bought me a drink at a party conference a good many years ago. But I'm interested in how the mid-counties is developing its membership events.
That's right.
Ones I can actually get to. There was a history one 5 years ago, and I didn't pay that route fare, didn't get there.
Oh, okay. No. That's great. Well, Luke, my apologies for missing you out. I just saw you, but you disappeared, so I wondered whether you dipped out. So you're most welcome. And I have to say, guys, I think we're covering quite a bit of the country tonight with regard to the geography of where people are based, which is brilliant, because this is all about, the whole cooperative history and how as a society, sort of we have those links. And clearly, as Mid-Counties is now a national cooperative, we have lots of members in lots of areas. So that's fantastic. So without further ado, very patiently, Richard has been waiting in the wings. And how this started was at the Member Engagement Committee meeting, we talked about potential groups or interests that might engage members, and history was one of the number one things that came out of it. Funny that, with Chaz and George on the committee, but definitely, that was where it was felt that we were at, and a number of members had also contacted us in various times. Stephen had contacted us directly. We're still in contact with Anne, Chris on occasion had mentioned some stuff to us, so we knew this was an area that would have some interest. I'm delighted that you've all stood by what you said and that you've joined us tonight, because I'd have been devastated if you hadn't after organising it. But from our point of view, this is about what this turns into, and we'll have some conversations after we've listened to Richard with regard to what do we want this group to be going forward? How do we want it? What's its focus? What's its purpose? How often do you want to meet? What would you like the format of these meetings to be? So I'm really going to throw the ball in your court. So I'm giving you some pre-warning, because after we've heard from Richard and how the history group works in Central Midlands very successfully, we'll talk about how we want the Mid-Counties group to work going forward, and what the key focuses are for us, what the purpose will be, as I said, and the scope. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over now to Richard, and Richard's going to talk a little bit about his background with regard to cooperative history, but also around the cooperative history group that they have at Central Midlands. So over to you, Richard. Richard, you're on mute if you're talking. If you're not, this is the point where I really needed you to talk to everybody. Oh, not sure. Richard, are you on mute? Can we take Richard off mute? Not sure. Can everybody else hear me, or am I talking to myself?
No, I can hear you, Tara.
Okay.
Yeah, Richard is on mute and I can't take it off.
Oh, Richard,
Does he
are you
need
back?
There we go.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Hi, Richard. Hi.
Oh, good. Right. Okay. My thing still shows it being muted, so I was desperately clicking and nothing was happening.
No, we can hear you and we can see you now, which is great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me this evening. My name's Richard Bickle, and I mean, I'm here in an entirely personal capacity, but I'm involved in lots of cooperative activities, a fair number of which have a historical dimension. I'm also currently an elected director of the Central England Cooperative Society. I convene a history network within the UK Society for Cooperative Studies, which everybody is very welcome to become part of. It's fairly informal. And it's really an information sharing network for people across the country who are interested in co-op history. And I'm also a member of the Birmingham Co-op History Group, which is one of the member groups supported by Central England. I suppose my cooperative story, my earliest co-op memory, if you like, growing up in North Cornwall, and it was great to hear some other West Country folk on the call, by the way, growing up in a small town of Launceston in North Cornwall in the 1980s. And when I went shopping with my mum at the age of 4 or 5, when we went shopping in the co-op on the high street in our town, when you queued up, when we used to queue up at Kate's till, because Kate was somebody that my mum knew who worked on the checkout. And when you queued up at Kate's till in our local co-op, she would always impress upon you, if you bought anything that was co-op brand, that it was made in our own factories with great pride. Now, that was, I'm not sure it's completely true at that time, but it was certainly still true because we still had factories that made quite a lot of things at that point. And then if we kind of wind the clock on about 10 years, and I was a A-level business studies student, and I came across a co-op stall at an event during the 1994 Rochdale Pioneers anniversary celebrations. And my mate and I went in and had a chat with the member relations people, and we got signed up as members of CRS, which is our local society. And I took that, I picked up all the literature I could find, got given some archive reproduction posters, which actually still hang on my bedroom wall at home in Cornwall even now. And I thought, well, what a brilliant idea, shouldn't all businesses be run like this? And I later found out that I had family cooperative links. When my dad and I were turning out some records to my granddad's house, we discovered that my great-great-grandfather had been a founding member of the local agricultural supply society in the kind of very early 20th century, which later became part of Cornwall Farmers. And my stepmum's grandfather, who'd been a farmer just outside Market Harbour in Leicestershire in the 1920s, his business had more or less been saved from going under during the agricultural depression by supplying the Market Harbour Cooperative Society, supplying the dairy with milk, which I think was facilitated by the nascent Milk Marketing Board as his nearest processing dairy. And then from the relationship that he developed with the managing secretary at Market Harbour, he started supplying them with vegetables and all sorts of other things. And that turned my stepmum's family into lifelong co-op members and customers. So in 1996, I moved to Norwich to start as an undergraduate at the University of East Anglia, where I studied economic and social history with politics. And on my first Saturday in Norwich, I went into town and I joined the Ipswich and Norwich Cooperative Society, discovered there was a members meeting coming up, which I turned up to. I'm not sure I'd actually been a member for long enough to be let in, but they let me in anyway. And I started asking awkward questions. And I was probably the youngest person in that meeting by about 40 years, I dare say. And I discovered they had an education committee, almost the last society in the country to have an education committee. And part of what that committee did was running a local co-op history group, who again had been formed in the run-up to the Rochdale anniversary to collect cooperative stories and banners and artefacts, while there were still people around who had those things to share. That all happened in Ipswich. The Norwich Society had merged with Ipswich a few years earlier, and I mean it had been cooperation in Norwich was at a pretty low ebb at that time. All the membership activity happened in Ipswich. So I said, well, why can't we have a co-op history group in Norwich? And started one. And kind of following on from that, when I graduated from uni, I did a bit of part-time work for the Co-op College doing some number crunching on a training programme that they'd run for the CWS. And at the same time, more or less, I was hired by Ipswich and Norwich Society on a freelance basis to do some work on the history of the Norwich Cooperative Society, because their board wanted to publish history of Ipswich and Norwich, and they had loads of records and photographs and material for the Ipswich end, but they had very, very little for Norwich. And that book was published in the run-up to Christmas 2000. We used the front cover to illustrate we still had a doorstep dairy in those days, and you know how for the Christmas milk orders, usually you get something through the door that's got an advert for the dairy diary on one side and the milk orders on the other. Well, that year, instead of advertising the dairy diary, we advertised the co-op history book, which was mainly pictures, and it was aimed at that sort of popular history kind of stocking filler kind of Christmas nostalgia market. And from dairy customers, we had something like 5,000 pre-orders before the first edition had even come back from the printers. So we had to rapidly reprint. And I think in the end, we sold almost 10,000 copies in about 6 weeks flat, had about 1,000 copies left in stock, of which I have a suspicion 200 or 300 are still sitting in the East of England Cooperative Society's Secretary's Department even now. Meanwhile, I've become involved with the UK Society for Cooperative Studies, which is how I first met George. And that's a fairly wide-ranging organisation, which includes people who are interested in all aspects of cooperation and the study of cooperation, but a significant number of those people are historians. And we discovered that United Society had been supporting, through their network of member groups in the Northwest, a co-op history network for a couple of years. But for various reasons, they'd hoped that it would become self-supporting rather than requiring ongoing staff input. And for various reasons, it hadn't. And I think the agenda of their member relations department moved on. I expect thinking back, I think the merger with the group was on cards. And there were a number of people who said, well, look, co-op history is really important. It's bigger than just United Society. Shouldn't we do something? So I said, oh, well, don't worry. We'll have a co-op history network within UKSCS, which, although I ceased to be the secretary of the overall society some years ago and stepped down from the executive about 3 years ago, I've never quite managed to pass on convening that network. So that's kind of background to me. When I moved to Birmingham, which again was to do some academic study in 2005, I discovered there was a co-op history group in Birmingham, which had been going since the early 1990s, which I became a member of and am still a member of. Now, the story of that and in some ways it parallels the story of the group that I've been involved with in Ipswich. It actually goes back to the 1980s, when someone who was later, it would have been Greater Midlands Society in those days, later a Greater Midlands Society member relations officer, was working in the publicity department. And when Birmingham Co-op sold their high street department store and central premises in 1985, an awful lot of stuff was in danger of being skipped. And in fact, some of it was skipped. And my friend who was working in publicity at the time made sure that as many photographs and artifacts and records as could be saved were saved. They were initially moved down to the offices above the transport department in Windsor Street, which was like a makeshift temporary head office ahead of the move to Lichfield, where Central England is still based now. And later, when she became the member relations officer in Birmingham, the Society had taken a lease on the top floor of the Birmingham and Midland Institute. For those of you who don't know the area, the BMI is quite an interesting institution in its own right. It's got a history going back to the 1700s, and it was set up. It's got a history not unlike the Mechanics Institutes and Working Men's Institutes, in as much as it was a voluntary organisation that was set up to provide education and access to books and so on to ordinary people. Interestingly, if you look back at the kind of past presidents on the board as you go in the door, you see quite a lot of them were bishops and JPs and what have you. So it wasn't that, I don't think it had quite that grassroots kind of character. Anyway, the Co-op took a lease on the top floor for member relations activities. And gradually, over a number of years, Sue started collecting any kind of Co-op related historical artifacts or records that came to light that would otherwise have been lost. And in 1993, I think, the Education Convention, Co-op Education Convention, which used to happen every year, passed a motion asking societies, member relations committees and membership departments to make a concerted effort to save as much cooperative history as they could ahead of the 1994 Rochdale anniversary celebrations. So the Greater Midlands Member Relations Committee in Birmingham embraced that with some enthusiasm, and they started off by organising a kind of antiques roadshow style event where they invited people to bring along anything that they got in their attics, you know, old Co-op china, minute books, certificates, whatever it was, and they found a history expert who could come and tell them a little bit about the object and, you know, where it had come from and so on and so forth. And out of the back of that, a group of people coalesced who started meeting on a monthly basis. This is kind of late 1993, and they've continued to meet on a monthly basis ever since. One of the things that has been done kind of off and on during that time is oral history. Certainly a big part of the Ipswich group was oral history. But for a significant number of years, a lot of the focus was on collecting archived material and artifacts and archiving them and making them available to interested people to come and have a look at. And that kind of carried on. Later on, Sue was promoted and in her retirement has continued convening that history group. And John Boyle, who some of you probably know, who's now a membership officer with the Co-op Party, was the member relations officer in Birmingham after Sue. And he also supported that work of collecting artifacts and archives, which became increasingly challenging in terms of actually storing particularly paper records in a way that was up to archival standards and was safe and, you know, stopped things from deteriorating when you weren't in a kind of temperature controlled proper archive building. And we were just running out of space, to be honest. That issue came to a head when the BMI as the landlord gave us 3 months notice to quit the space because they'd had an offer to rehome the Birmingham Conservatoire, the music school, for a whole academic year. So we moved our member activities, member groups, dancing classes and goodness knows what, out to different premises around the city. And we had to find something to do with the archive collection. So the National Co-op Archive in Manchester had most of the photographs and papers. We had quite a lot of Women's Guild banners and other objects, some of which went to the People's History Museum in Manchester, some went to the Working Class Movement Library in Salford. And then we also had things which went to the Aston Manor Road Transport Museum, which is actually now at Aldridge, near Walsall. And we also had some stuff that went to the Wizzle Transport Museum near Bromsgrove. And both those transport museums, by the way, happen to also have some Historic Society vehicles in their collections. So Wizzle has got milk floats and a battery electric bread van, and Aldridge has got a horse-drawn bread delivery van, a hand cart, which I think came from the Ripley Cooperative Society, and a couple of other smaller vehicles. And we've got a fantastic guy called Mark Allen who works for the display department of Central England. Most of his job is doing shop fitting in new stores and refits, but he will very happily turn his hand to almost anything. And he was asked by the Aldridge Transport Museum to construct a kind of mock-up co-op street with some mocked-up packaging, just to provide a little bit of interpretation around the material which is there. Now, during this time, the history group had tended to have a pattern of monthly meetings, but in July, we usually went on a visit somewhere of cooperative interest. And in December, we usually had a social and sometimes had another visit to somewhere not quite so far away, again, of cooperative interest. And we would intersperse guest speakers with meetings that we organised, based on our own activities. And after we, in effect, lost the collection, and I think we went through a bit of a grieving process, to be honest, about that, because, particularly Linda and Tony Chu and Sue Letts had put an awful lot of time and energy into collecting that material over, a 30-year period. And although it's all gone to good homes, to lose that from a single collection was really difficult. And now that we don't have that, I mean, we've saved one or two bits and pieces, but we basically don't have that. We do have a lot of the images digitized, by the way. We've had to rethink a little bit what we do. So we've moved to having more guest speakers. So Chaz came and did a fantastic session for us about the history of the Kens Cross and Eberley Cooperative Society. And it's interesting because some of the people who come to our group are people who are interested in the history of Birmingham or the history of the West Midlands, as much as they're interested in history of co-ops. And we kind of thought, well, those of us who are co-op nuts love learning about co-ops from anywhere, but would people actually come along and listen to Chaz talking about Stroud? And actually, it went down really, really well. And some of our people who were more local history than co-op history people enjoyed it just as much as anybody else, because somebody, it turned out, one of our members, used to go on childhood holidays to the area, so he could talk to Chaz about, particular villages outside Stroud and the cooperative connection that they had. Then coming right up to date, we realised that this year was the 140th anniversary of the Birmingham Industrial Cooperative Society being founded, and it was the 150th anniversary of the Halesowen and Hasbury Cooperative Society being founded. So we've spent most of this year in quite challenging conditions, being forced to move to an entirely online activity to do things to mark those anniversaries. Now, as some of you who are familiar with the history of mid-counties will know, within the Black Country, in the mid-20th century, there were 4 significant societies. There was Halesowen and Hasbury and Dudley societies, which both became part of Birmingham, Greater Midlands, Central Midlands, Midlands and now Central England. and Walsall and Wolverhampton, which became part of Walsall, West Midlands, and then Mid-Counties. We discovered a few years ago, in fact, before we realised that the Hales Owen anniversary was coming up, actually, that the Black Country Living Museum were looking to recreate a 1940s, 50s and 60s street. So those of you who don't know the Black Country Museum, it's a bit like Beamish in that it's a living museum, it's outdoors, it's recreated buildings which tell the story of life and work in the Black Country from the kind of dawn of the Industrial Revolution, initially up to 1940, and I now want to extend that up to 1970. So I found out about that because a friend of mine was working at the museum, and I said, "Oh, you know, we've just done it. We did a co-op trip to Beamish. They've got this building. It's brilliant. Why don't you have a what about recreating a co-op on your new street?" And he went and talked to some colleagues, and they said, "Yes, actually, that would be really significant because cooperation was part of everyday life in the towns and villages that make up the Black Country. Right from the kind of mid 19th century onwards." So I contacted our property department. We looked at all the records we had of any extant co-op buildings in the Black Country which were vacant. I mean, we looked at some Mid-Counties property, I think in Bloxwich, amongst other places. But the property which we identified was the former Horn branch of Hales Owen and Hasbury, which was on Stourbridge Road in Hales Owen. And Central England Co-op tried very hard to donate that building to the museum. Quite why it didn't work. Basically, they've decided to recreate the building from scratch rather than to translocate it brick by brick. It was vacant in a very poor state of repair. It was still owned by the society. And in fact, last summer it was sold, and it was sold to a bicycle retailer who told us, as in Central England Co-op, that he was going to restore the building for his bicycle business. In actual fact, he pulled it down. So we were very, very glad that the museum had a chance to get in there with the tape measures and the photographs and record enough information to be able to recreate that shop, of which the walls are currently going up now. It'll be ready in 2023, but obviously these projects take some time. And they're going to dress the shop. They were interested in that branch because it was the first one to go self-service. So it was the first, in inverted commas, supermarket in Hales Owen. It was the second self-service conversion that Hales Owen and Hasbury had done. I think their first one was in Wollaston. But 1949 was pretty early for self-service. And they've then been doing some work which I was on a Teams thing with them on Tuesday night, which George was talking about at the beginning of this meeting, where they've been collecting stories and memories and artifacts. And one of the interesting things about that project is that while the shop is going to be set in 1949, kind of when rationing was still on, but with this kind of early move to self-service, the room behind the shop, which in the original would have been the manager's office in the warehouse and where they packed up the home delivery orders, in the recreation, it's going to be an early years learning room for like nursery age children. And one of the stories they found, which is actually from the Wolverhampton Cooperative Society, was that Wolverhampton Co-op, their education department, I think in the 1950s, from time to time set up a mini co-op, like a mocked up co-op in a local hall or meeting room that members could bring their children to learn about shopping and to learn about money and how to give change and how to weigh things out and how to pack up goods, which seemed like such a great story and such a great idea that that's kind of what's inspired the museum to recreate that. So over the summer, on one weekend in August, we got all the Central England Co-op branches in Birmingham and the West Midlands, the kind of two area managers and the store managers got really excited. And they all dressed up in 1940s clothing and staff from the museum and characters from the museum turned up, and we did some fundraising to help to pay for the fit out of this mini co-op. And with a bit of a contribution from the Member and Community Council, we're going to be giving them a cheque for just over £5,000, which will pay for about a third of the cost of that fit out. And although Birmingham on a August weekend is very, very quiet, and certainly the shops I was in were quiet, the buy-in that we got from colleagues was fantastic. And the conversations that we had with members and customers were really, really interesting. So those of you who were talking about, you know, relating history to the present day, it absolutely works. And then the other thing that we've done over the summer, it's been a very busy summer, is that as part of Birmingham Heritage Week, to mark the Birmingham 140th anniversary, we did a Co-op Heritage Weekend down at Wizzle Transport Museum. They got out the historical vehicles that they've got. We presented them with CWS delivery bike, which had been manufactured by the CWS in Tyseley and has spent its working life in a 10 acres of Sturchley Cooperative Society grocery branch, which we'd saved about 30 years ago and was sitting in one of our members' garages. We presented that on long-term loan. We borrowed one of Mid-County's electric hearses, and we took along one of Central England's new electric delivery vans. And we were able to take that story of environmentally friendly electric delivery vehicles kind of full circle from 1940s milk floats and bread vans right up to you know, the kind of cutting edge of technology today. And again, it was a jumping off point for some really interesting conversations with people, some of whom were transport enthusiasts, some of whom were co-operators, but all of whom could relate to what we were doing. And I suppose my observations from all of that would be, for talks and guest speakers, an online format can work really well. I mean, I'm sure, oh goodness me, I'm sure if, you know, I'm sure if when Chaz came to talk to us about Keynes Cross and Ebley, if we'd done that online, we could have had, you know, rather than the kind of 18 people in the room, we could have had 40 or 50 people online. We did in Fairtrade Fortnight, we got Central England's Chief Exec, Debbie Robinson, to talk about the history of fair trade, because when she worked for the CWS, she was involved with the co-op movement's engagement with fair trade, from the Fair Trade Foundation's trademark being registered in 1994 all the way on. But in her early career, she'd worked in the CWS factories, you know, which had that kind of ethos of treating people fairly that you can see going right back to the 19th century. That was a Zoom call, and we got 30 or 40 people from all over the country on that. So I think when you've got guest speakers who've got interesting things to say, the wider you throw the net within reason, the better. But I also think that it's good to have local links and local routes, because, you know, local newspapers love stories about co-op history. They love to put out appeals for stories and artifacts. Quite a lot of local museums may have co-op stuff in their collections. And because so many societies were founded in the 1870s, 60s, 70s and 80s, anniversaries, 125 years, 140 years, 150 years, they're all excuses to tell a story and engage people. And certainly, I know Jane Avery, who happens to be Central England Society president, but this is not with her Central England hat on, works for a co-op development agency in Leicester, who've had a Heritage Lottery Fund grant over the last 18 months to do some work on the history of co-ops in Leicestershire, both, you know, the retail co-ops going back to the 19th century and the worker and community co-ops, which have been created in the last 40 years. It was going to happen summer 2000 during Co-op's Fortnight and have a travelling exhibition. In actual fact, they ended up doing an exhibition this year in an arts centre in Leicester during August, and in a 2-week period 1,400 people came along, and during that exhibition they had volunteers with tape recorders who were doing oral history work as people were coming through the exhibition. So there's definitely appetite out there, and I think if you can find ways to relate the past to the present to the future, that's really, really good. I mean, that's about as much as I've got to say, I think. You know, happy to take questions and have a conversation. Thank you.
Right, Richard, thank you so much for that. So much information there. And I think from our point of view, really understanding a bit of how Central have kept a history group going for so long, and the achievements of that is really, really informative. There's a couple of people with their hands up. So George, I can see your hand up. You're on mute, George.
Sorry, Tara, apologies for that. Looking back at co-op history, I'm not sure, but I think we've lost a lot of CPF, Cooperative Productive Federation, and I'd like to know if you know whether any of that history has saved. I know that Leicester Carriage Builders was, if you like, in quotes, taken on by Central Midlands, or prior to Central England Cooperative Society's day. So I'd just like to know if anything has been retained or been able to been acquired in order to keep that history alive, because that was really the first of worker co-ops, if you like.
So that's quite interesting, because I think that's partly, I'll pass that question on to Jane about the work they've done in Leicester. I mean, in terms of Leicester Carriage Builders itself, for those of you who don't know, Leicester Carriage Builders was one of quite over 100 productive cooperative societies that were founded in the latter part of the 19th century, pretty much, one or two in the early 20th, where retail societies put up the capital, but the workers in those societies were members and got a profit share, and in some cases had a say in the management. By the 1970s, pretty much all of the society members of Leicester Carriage Builders had become part of Leicestershire Co-op, and in the end, by the 1990s, Leicestershire Co-op bought out the worker shareholders, and LCB became a wholly owned subsidiary, and it was doing things like building battery electric vehicles, building mobile library vans, building like Securicor vans for the post office and so on. And in fact, it even did UN armoured personnel carriers at one time. But by the time I got onto the board 8 years ago, it had become loss-making. It was in the same premises it had been in since 1928, which were increasingly decrepit. And we took the sad decision, but the necessary decision, to close it down, basically. Now, a handful of the people who worked there actually set up their own business with their redundancy money and are carrying on doing bespoke vehicle conversion on their own account now. I believe the archives of Leicester Carriage Builders found their way into the Leicestershire County Archives, but there were a number of other productive societies in that area. NPS Shoes in Wellingborough was another one, Equity Shoes in Leicester, and Queen Eleanor in the Kettering area. They all finally ceased about 10 years ago. What by the end was left in terms of records and what happened to them, I don't know, but I'll see whether Jane's found any of that out from her work. Certainly the Co-op Productive Federation's records nationally are in the National Co-op Archive, and you can search that on the Archives Hub.
Can I just say, if anybody wants a Queen Eleanor suit, one of the last that was made, I've got it.
I remember you won it at Congress, didn't you,
Yep.
George? Yes.
Marvellous, great story. I can see, I think, Brian, you've got your hand up. Oh, so David.
Yeah, can I join you now?
Hi, David.
Oh, hello. I am familiar with Teams, but I'm having difficulty in inserting into a chat box the link that I promised in relation to the 11 short videos that we produced arising from the 250th celebration activities for birth of Robert Owen.
That's fine, David. If you email it to me or
Okay.
to Karen, and I'll put my email address in the chat for you. Can you see the chats?
No, I can't. It's really strange, actually. I've got people, and usually I don't have any problem at all with Teams or whatever.
Well, we've got your email address, so Karen will email you tomorrow, and then you can email back Karen the link, and we'll send it out to everybody.
Okay, that's brilliant. I just want to make a number of points. It was really interesting listening to the creative and imaginative way Richard and colleagues have been working on these issues for decades, and probably for very few pennies at that. So I was really impressed with all the creative work that had been done in your neck of the country. What came over to me, though, was the way in which, where you've got strong independent societies with proper functioning member relations departments, it's possible to use, if you like, local history as a means of actually engaging effectively with not just members but the wider community. The difficulty I think we have in Wales is that because of the whole set of reasons to do with societies being poorly run, providing extended credit during the general strike, and so on, a lot of societies, small societies, went into CRS or disappeared. There are obviously records in the South Wales Miners Library, and I think there are probably other records in the National Archive Museum. But there doesn't seem to me to be any concerted sort of attempt to try and pull material together from a Welsh perspective. And Court Mutuals Wales have just had a small grant via the Cooperative group supported by the National Members Council to enable us to do some work. But our focus is going to be around schools, because we think that we can spread the message very effectively if we work through the public education system, which is quite different in a sense from the English national curriculum system. So I very much look forward to the possibility of sharing and networking around how we make cooperative history looking backwards, but also looking forwards in terms of what would we be doing now, how we actually network and work together cooperatively on those issues. I find that really, really very, very helpful, because I'm sure it will enable us to make the best possible use of the grant aid that we've had from the Cooperative group and from the small number of volunteers that we have here in Wales.
I mean, I think one of the interesting things about both mid-counties and central England is that in recent years, we've moved outside our traditional trading areas into areas that have been basically abandoned by Co-op Group, certainly from a membership point of view and partly from a trading point of view, which have their own cooperative history. So, I mean, we're opening stores in Leeds and Wakefield, and we'd love to engage with Roger and the people in the Leeds Co-op History Group. You know, we're moving into bits of Cambridgeshire, which would have been Cambridge Society, which have their own cooperative histories. And mid-counties similarly, you know, have moved into bits of Shropshire and the Marches, which would have been CRS areas years ago.
Absolutely, and yeah, clearly we've got a store in Churchstoke, in Powys. So we're just over that border. We recently disposed of our McCuncliffe store. Geographically, it was sort of way out of that area. But certainly, I think we can consider ourselves, David, to be, you know, working with Wales as well as. So you're most welcome, and maybe there's an opportunity there. Let's explore it. Okay, I'm mindful of the time, and mindful that really we need to start thinking about. You know, I'm sure you've all enjoyed a great evening, and Scott, fantastic tweet that you've put out there to say that you're enjoying this evening with a nice bottle of wine, which is fantastic. But and some of us are still waiting to get our glass of wine this evening. Well deserved, can I just say myself as well. So from our point of view, it's about saying, I think we've established tonight that there is a passion around this subject, and definitely a desire to do more as a group. What that looks like, who knows? How we keep that engagement, we grow that ongoing sort of engagement, and members into the group. It is for us to really toy with. But I really just want to get your view on some of the ideas that we've put, that I've literally pulled together and thrown with regard to, what could we possibly as a group add value to, and are people interested in? My personal view, and it's been mentioned a couple of times this evening actually, is I'm very passionate about engaging with the co-operators of tomorrow, the next generation of co-operators and the young co-operators, and actually bringing that history to them. And I know Anne Ransom had a great idea when we were talking earlier in the year, and I hope she won't mind me sharing that with you. And she talked about the innovation of cooperatives. What are the top 100 things that cooperatives did first? And she mentioned Edna Marshall earlier, and I am the proud owner of a carrier bag that was crocheted by Edna Marshall when they started looking at how we recycle plastic carrier bags back in the early 1980s. Mm-hmm. So we think all this stuff that we're doing now is new, and the youngsters of today might think it's new, but actually there's been lots of people talking about these things for a while. So stuff around innovation, I think for me, I absolutely get that a number of us would love to sit and listen to the likes of Chaz talk about Stroud. I'm sure Chris talk about some of his experiences. Richard, some of your history, things that you bring to the table. So key speakers, I think, is something that we could add to this group. But really want to get a feel for you, from you, with regard to so what's next? We've had a great evening, but what's next? So some thoughts. Put your thoughts in the chat, or put your hand up and tell us what you think.
Can I just say, I think it's important where we have led, and one of the things that people don't know about, of course, is self-service. It was the movement that really, if you like, introduced self-service to the UK, and I think it's it's something that we shouldn't let pass. I think there is a sign in the I think it's Plymouth or Portsmouth. Excuse my history. Portsmouth. I think that should be acknowledged. So things that we've done. I mean, like we're talking about electric vehicles, but I know other people had electric vehicles for delivering the milk. But let's push the co-op and the way they initiated electric vehicles many years ago. In terms of the environment, there's just two things I can think of.
Right, thanks, George. Okay, I can see that. I think I keep losing my people, but I think we've got another hand up, and I think that hand is up by Roger. Sorry.
Yes, hi. First of all, Richard, fantastic. Did I hear you say correctly that you're opening up in Wakefield and Leeds?
Yes.
Well, it can't come sooner, because the group at the moment are too busy converting a lot of our smaller stores into nicer or nicer stores, which means that although they're stocking co-op products, people aren't getting their rewards. So that would be a good kick up the butt to the group, I think.
Yeah, we're in Barnsley. We've got 2 stores in Barnsley already.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
We're as far as Barnby Dun on the outskirts of Doncaster, but I think there are 2 sites in Wakefield and 1 on the edge of Leeds. Although, don't necessarily quote me on that, because obviously what is approved by the board and then what can actually be delivered, sometimes, you know, planning doesn't happen, or a seller pulls out or whatever.
Yeah, that's great. It's great news anyway. That's fantastic. Can I just think, as a starter, as an outsider, I would like to see a family tree of what made the societies that made up mid-counties. Does one exist, you know, or does anyone know?
I will defer to Anne Ransom. She will tell me, I'm sure, off the top of her head. Anne, is there a family tree? I think there is. See, Anne's ducked that very important question. I will find it. I'm sure that there is.
Yes, it's in the book. It's an appendix at the back.
Yeah, thanks. I knew there would be, Anne. I knew there would be. Yeah. I can share that with everybody. I will get a copy of that from Edward Parker for us.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. So again, very conscious of the time, and thanks, Chris, as always. Scott, putting stuff in the chat. How often? Let's get to the practicalities. I'm hoping that you will all come back. 14 of us on the call tonight, and hopefully we can inspire some other people as well as. But how often do you think we need to schedule these meetings for? Online for the foreseeable future? I think online ongoing, because clearly of the geography of everybody. Even if there's a few of us get together, but certainly, Richard, I think you said monthly in Central. How do people feel, monthly or bi-monthly? Julia said
bi-monthly.
Yeah, bi-monthly.
I think bi-monthly for this.
Yeah.
Okay, marvellous. So bi-monthly. So we're in September now, so we will schedule another one for November, and then one for January, and we'll continue that way. That's fantastic. Thoughts? We will email out this slide to everybody tomorrow. So Karen, who you can't see at the moment, well, we can see Karen, but Karen can't see us, bless her. Karen will send out this slide to everybody tomorrow, and I'd really be interested in what you'd like to see in the next 12 months from this group, and how we can facilitate some of that for you. There is an absolute opportunity to publish some articles to our members. We've now got a members newsletter that goes out every month, predominantly around events and key messages. Absolutely happy to publish some articles there. Clearly, we've got our AGM. We will hold COVID allowing, I'm hoping, May 2022. We have our AGM, and we've always had a history part of that for the last 3-4 years, and we'll continue to do that next year. So that's something for us to think about. But also wondered about how, as a sort of get us started, if there are some of you that would be prepared to do a bit of a blog, we can film you, or we can arrange for you to be interviewed, and we can do that via Teams, that we can then share with our members about your, anything to do with cooperation that you're happy to talk about, and the reason why you're involved as a cooperator, but also the reasons why you're interested in culture, history and heritage. And what I'd really like to do with that is get some of our young cooperators to interview you. So this isn't our show. This is about, really, we've got 200 now young cooperators on our Young Cooperative Network. And I'd like to put it out to them to say, do you want to give up an hour to talk to somebody about cooperative stories, that we can start to build that library, but get younger cooperators engaged at the same time. So I'm keen to do that, and if there is anybody on this call that is willing to put themselves forward to be interviewed by a young cooperator on a subject that you're comfortable with, and that can be anything around cooperation, or even, you know, your family connections with cooperation, and reasons why you've continued to be a cooperator. That's something that would be great, and I'd ask you just to let us know, and we'll organise that soon for you. Okay, I'm conscious of the time, and Chaz, I saw you put some notes in the chat. I think we lost you for a time, Chaz, but I think you're back. Can't pick up your chat at the moment. Chaz, are you there? Calling Chaz. No. Chaz, unfortunately, was having problems with his internet connection, so I think he keeps dialing in and out. But I suppose, you know, we are at time now for the time this evening. I hope you feel that you've got some value, and you've welcomed the opportunity to meet with some other cooperators. I've certainly learned something. Can I just tell you that I live 3 miles from Aldridge, and I had no idea that there was a transport museum in Aldridge. I've just Googled it. You're absolutely right, Richard, and I shall be taking a mosey past there. Who knew?
Next Co-ops Fortnight, the membership team at Central England will be doing an event at Aldridge Transport Museum. And I'm sure we would be delighted, seeing as it's really more on your patch than ours.
It is absolutely in our patch, can I just say.
If you wanted a collaborative effort for Co-ops Fortnight at Aldridge, I'm sure that would be warmly received.
Fantastic. Okay. And I've just picked up a chat message. Sorry, George.
Sorry, send us a link, Richard.
I will. It's James Spice, our membership officer, who's organising it. I didn't know till last week.
Thanks. Sorry, Tara.
That's right. And one of the things that we've also agreed, you know, working really closely, you know, this cooperation amongst cooperatives hasn't always been something that we've been very good at, but certainly ourselves and Central have always had a really good relationship. And as part of the history project, we've made a commitment to keep talking to each other. And we will promote each other's events. We will promote, you know, a lot of you will be Central members. Some of you are group members. Some of you are Heart of England members. And you know, we don't really care. We just want people to talk about cooperation and try and bring things together. And as we've said, hopefully over a period of time, maybe we can start to look at that bigger picture. And certainly for Wales, and make sure that David feels that's being valued as well as. I'm conscious of the time. There's a couple of hands up. I'm happy to stay on for 5 minutes, but if people have to drop off, then I'm quite understanding of that. But if there is anybody that wants to ask another question, please jump in. No, Chris is lovely filling up my chat as always. God bless.
Tara.
Yes.
It's David Smith.
Hi, David Smith.
I think this is a really important opportunity for us to cooperate across the UK, and maybe further than that, around corp history, looking backwards and seeing that how that actually informs and energizes clarity in future action. What I would really appreciate is setting aside a future event where we could just focus on specific issues. For example, we've got a very keen interest in understanding how we work effectively inside the national curriculum, communicating the reach and influence of Robert Owen and what that has to say, what that can say to us today in terms of climate change and so on. So to be able to share at a UK level across societies, and including Scott Mid, being able to share across across the UK how we're actually thinking of or are working with schools, that would be excellent. And it would be nice to see if we could bring in the Robert Owen Museum and the New Lanark Trust to see what materials they have that can be made more generally available. And maybe other people on the call will have other suggestions there, but I think we could actually set up maybe a 2-hour event with inputs from different speakers. I mean, very happy to share thoughts on that without pestering everyone too much with something that we're really concerned with at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're the things that I think you're right. You know, we need to focus on some key areas going forward. And I think that will add value as well as one of the things that will be, I suppose, asking permissions, and Karen will email out and ask for permissions to whether or not you are happy to set up as an email group. So you can email the group, ask questions and whatever else. We can't do that without permissions, clearly, but that is something that that we can look at, and it gives an opportunity really for you to tap into each other's knowledge and networks as well as. But we will hopefully set that up, and if everybody's happy with that, then we'll take it forward. Stephen, I can see you've got your hand up.
It's one for Richard, really. It was a lot to take in earlier on, and I wondered, are there any brief notes, synopsis, resume of what you've presented tonight, or your contacts and your organisations that we could just digest and just skim over?
That was off the top of my head, but I can construct. I will construct some notes that can go round.
Lovely, thank you.
And I'm hoping, not that I'm not putting Richard on the spot here, but I am hoping that Richard will become a friend of this group, and we will see him regularly. You know, I think there's, you know, we talk about some key topics. I know that Richard, as Chaz, as others, will have some, you know, we could spend an hour talking about one specific area of cooperation, or one group of cooperatives, and I think that's something that we look at going forward as well as. But I just want to say I'm delighted that you have all joined this evening. I am conscious of the time now, and I think it would be, you know, we need to be mindful of people getting off. If there's anything else that you want to add, please put it in the chat. The chat will stay live tonight, so that's fine. I'll pick up there. If anything you want to contact me directly, Chaz, please do so, and I will make sure that there is a meeting scheduled for November, and we'll pick up then. But we also need to pick up some new people along the way as well as, so we need to make this as an inclusive group as possible. So I'm hoping that more tweets will go out from yourselves, and that you'll spread the word that we exist. And as we move into 2022, we have an exciting programme around history that we can really get our teeth into. Okay, so thank you everybody, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you at one of the half-yearly meetings. Just a little bit of a plug there, on the 13th or 14th, and more conversation meetings. All right.
Yep. Thank you,
Good
Tara.
evening and enjoy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, Karen.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks for your time.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now, both.
Bye.
Bye.